man was a creature of routine. Every day he walked the same path to work, his shoes echoing a rhythmic tune on the cobblestone streets of the old town. His name was Daniel, and he had a peculiar fondness for the quaintness that seemed to seep out of every brick and beam around him. His office, nestled between an antique bookstore and a dusty bakery, was a small sanctuary of order and predictability amidst the charming chaos. He had a way with numbers, a gift that made him the town's most trusted accountant. His clients ranged from the local butcher to the mysterious recluse who owned the sprawling mansion on the hill. Daniel never questioned the source of their wealth. His job was to keep their finances in check, not to probe into their personal lives. One evening, as he was locking up his office, the bell above the door chimed a final goodbye, sending a shiver down his spine. The street lamps flickered to life, casting a warm glow over the cobblestone. Daniel had forgotten his umbrella, and the heavens opened up, releasing a torrent of rain that seemed to have been held at bay just for him. He sprinted down the alleyway that was his usual shortcut home, the rain plastering his shirt to his back. As he turned the corner, something caught his eye: a figure, shrouded in a long cloak, standing at the entrance to the alley. It was an unusual sight, as the area was usually deserted at this hour. The figure's head was bowed, and its hands clutched a bundle tightly to its chest. Daniel felt a strange compulsion to approach, his curiosity piqued by the silent sentinel that seemed to be waiting just for him. He slowed his pace, allowing the rain to muffle his footsteps. The closer he got, the more unnerving the figure became. It was as if it was made of the very shadows that danced on the alley walls. As he was about to speak, the figure lifted its head, revealing a face that was pale and drawn, with eyes that gleamed like polished marbles in the dim light. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he realized that the eyes were fixed on him, watching him intently. The creature's mouth stretched into a smile that was more of a grimace, and it held out the bundle towards him. The urge to flee was strong, but Daniel found himself inexplicably drawn to it. With trembling hands, he took the offered package. It was surprisingly warm and heavy. Rainwater dripped from the fabric onto his shoes, forming little puddles that reflected the eerie glow of the street lamps. The figure spoke, its voice a chilling whisper that seemed to resonate through his very bones. "Take this to the house at the end of the lane," it said, pointing with a bony finger to the narrowest part of the alley. "Do not open it. Do not look inside. Just deliver it." With that, the creature melted back into the shadows, leaving Daniel alone in the rain with the enigmatic bundle. He stared at the package, the rain now a gentle patter against his forehead. His mind raced with questions. What was inside? Who was this creature? Why was he chosen for this cryptic errand? Yet something about its pleading tone made him feel responsible for seeing it through. The house at the end of the lane was an unassuming cottage, its ivy-covered walls whispering secrets that had long been forgotten by the town. The door was slightly ajar, and a flicker of candlelight danced within. Daniel's heart pounded as he approached, the rain now a distant echo in his ears. As he reached the doorstep, a gust of wind slammed the door open, revealing an interior that was surprisingly warm and welcoming. The scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the soft glow of candles cast a warm embrace over the room. Yet there was something eerie about the scene, a sense of foreboding that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He stepped inside, the rainwater pooling around his feet, and called out. There was no answer, only the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. He could feel the weight of the bundle in his arms, growing heavier with each passing second, almost as if it were alive. The interior of the cottage was a puzzle of shadows and flickering light. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their contents spilling onto the floor in a disarray that seemed deliberate rather than careless. The furniture was aged and worn, yet maintained an air of regality that seemed out of place in the humble setting. Daniel found himself drawn to the staircase, the wood groaning beneath his feet as he ascended. At the top was a single door, the only one on the floor, and it was slightly open. He could hear a faint murmur of voices, a conversation that seemed to be coming from another world. He approached the door, his hand hovering over the brass knob. The voices grew clearer, the words twisting and snaking around his mind, filling him with dread. He didn't understand the language, but the tone was one of anger and desperation. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped into the room. The sight that greeted him was one of chaos. Furniture was overturned, and the floor was littered with pages torn from the very books that had once adorned the walls. In the center of the room, a table was set for a feast that had never been enjoyed. The plates were shattered, and the food had turned to ash. On the wall behind it, a large portrait of a family stared down at the destruction, their expressions a silent scream of terror frozen in time. And there, in the corner, huddled on the floor, was a woman, her eyes wide with fear. She looked at Daniel, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of recognition. But then she screamed, a sound that tore through the fabric of reality itself, and the world around him began to spin. The voices grew louder, the room colder. Daniel felt a presence behind him, but when he whirled around there was nothing but the open doorway and the dark hallway beyond. His heart hammered in his chest, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. He knew he needed to get out of there, to leave this place of shadows and whispers, but the bundle in his arms felt like a lead weight, anchoring him to the spot. The woman continued to wail, her cries echoing through the cottage like the howling of a banshee. Daniel stumbled towards her, the floor seeming to shift beneath his feet. He had to help her, had to get her to tell him what was happening. But as he got closer, he noticed something strange about her. Her skin was almost transparent, and through it he could see the bones beneath. Her eyes, once vibrant with life, were now dull and sunken, like two dark pits in a sea of despair. Her clothes hung off her skeletal frame in tatters, and her hair was a wild mess of tangles that seemed to writhe and twist like a nest of snakes. The voices grew louder still, the air thick with a malevolence that seemed to choke him. He realized with a start that the woman wasn't real, she was a ghost, a specter of someone who had suffered a terrible fate in this very room. And now she was trapped, reliving her last moments over and over again. The bundle grew hotter, and he could feel something moving within. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and his hand trembled as he reached for the string that bound it. The ghostly woman's cries grew more frantic, as if she knew what he was about to do. With a tremendous effort, Daniel loosened the knot. The fabric fell away, revealing a small, lifeless form. It was a doll, dressed in a tattered wedding gown, its porcelain face twisted into a silent scream. The sight of it made his blood run cold. As he held the doll, the room around him began to shake. The voices grew into a cacophony, and the shadows grew longer and more sinister. The ghost woman's screams grew louder, her eyes boring into his very soul. The air grew colder, colder than the depths of winter. Daniel's breath misted before him, and the candles began to flicker erratically. He knew he had made a mistake, that he had disturbed something that should have remained hidden. The floorboards cracked, the walls groaned, and the very air was filled with a palpable anger. The doll in his hands grew hotter, and he could feel it pulsing with a dark energy. And then, without warning, the room was plunged into darkness. The screams stopped, and the only sound was the pounding of his own heart. When the lights returned, the room was as it had been when he entered, quiet, still, and empty. The ghostly woman was gone, and so was the sense of dread that had filled the air. But the doll remained, its lifeless gaze seeming to follow him wherever he turned. With trembling hands, Daniel picked up the doll and made his way back to the door. As he stepped into the hallway, the grandfather clock downstairs chimed midnight. The sound reverberated through the house, and the floorboards creaked ominously beneath his feet. The cottage felt alive now, as if it had woken from a deep slumber. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the shadows danced in a macabre ballet of malice. He knew he had to leave, but the door was gone, replaced by a wall of solid oak. Panic began to set in. Daniel was trapped, and the doll in his arms felt heavier than ever. The whispers grew louder, the walls closing in, and he realized with a start that he wasn't alone. The ghosts of the house had woken, and they were watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. He tried to find his way back downstairs, his eyes scanning the floor for the wet footprints he had made earlier. But they were gone, as if the very floor had absorbed the evidence of his presence. The books on the shelves rattled, and the pages fluttered in a breeze that didn't exist. The candles on the floor sputtered out one by one, leaving him in a world of dancing shadows that grew more menacing by the second. The doll grew hotter still, and the whispers grew clearer, forming words he didn't understand but felt in his very core. They were words of anger, of pain, of vengeance. Daniel knew he had to get rid of it, to put it back where it belonged before it was too late. He stumbled down the hallway, the walls seeming to breathe in and out as he passed. The doorways to other rooms yawned open, revealing scenes of despair and agony frozen in time. The spirits of the house's former inhabitants reached out to him, their icy fingers brushing against his skin, urging him onward. Finally, he reached the top of the stairs, the doll now almost too hot to hold. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew to a fever pitch. The house was alive with the pain of its past, and Daniel was the unwilling conduit for its anger. He took a deep breath and flung the doll down the staircase. It hit the bottom with a thud, the sound echoing through the cottage. The whispers stopped abruptly, the house holding its breath. For a moment, there was silence deafening and absolute. Then, with a thunderous crack, the door to the room he had entered slammed shut, and the lock clicked into place. Daniel felt the house exhale, the pressure releasing as the spirits retreated into the shadows from which they came. The cottage was quiet once more, the candles flickering back to life. The door was still there, untouched by the chaos that had just unfolded. Daniel knew that he had to leave, that the house had a new keeper now, a doll that contained the rage of the past. He descended the stairs slowly, the doll's eyes seeming to follow him from the bottom of the staircase. As he reached the front door, he could feel the cottage watching him, a living entity that had just reclaimed a piece of itself. With a final, trembling breath, he stepped outside into the night, the rain now a gentle caress on his skin. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the alley. He didn't dare look back, didn't dare acknowledge the presence that now filled the cottage. The rain had washed away the last of the spectral figures, leaving Daniel alone on the cobblestone path. He walked home slowly, the weight of his actions heavy on his shoulders. As he reached the safety of his own door, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just set something free, something that would never truly leave him alone.